whispering shadows of Ravenwood. There is a forest, deep in the heart of Europe, known as Ravenwood. The villagers nearby avoid it, for they say it is cursed, and those who venture too deep never return. It's not the trees they fear. It's what lies beneath the shadows. Thomas, a young man from the city, had heard the stories. But he wasn't one to believe in superstitions. So, when he arrived at the village, curious about the forest that everyone avoided, he decided to venture into Ravenwood. As he walked through the village, the locals stared at him with pity, whispering warnings in hushed voices. But Thomas shrugged them off. It's just a forest, he thought. He didn't believe for a second that a few trees could be anything more than that. By evening, Thomas entered the woods. The trees loomed overhead like dark sentinels, casting long shadows on the ground. The further he went, the more the forest seemed to close in around him. The air grew cold and still. No birds, no wind, nothing. He walked for what seemed like hours, but the deeper he went, the more he felt like he was being washed. Suddenly, a soft, almost inaudible whisper reached his ears. "Help me." Thomas froze. He spun around, but there was nothing. The forest was as silent as ever. Probably just the wind, he muttered to himself. But then, the whisper came again. This time, closer. "Help me." The voice was no longer just a whisper. It sounded desperate. Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. He turned and saw her, a pale woman standing in the distance, her white dress billowing in the wind. Her long, dark hair hung loosely, covering most of her face. "Please, help me," she called, her voice trembling with fear. Thomas, despite his unease, felt a strange compulsion to approach her. He stepped forward. "Who are you?" he called, his voice echoing in the still air. The woman's eyes slowly met his. They were empty, dark, hollow pits, as if they had seen things no human should ever witness. The air around her grew colder. "I've been lost here for centuries," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Cursed to wander these woods forever. Please, help me find peace." Thomas hesitated. But something about her sadness made him step closer. As he reached out to her, her form began to flicker and distort. Her body warped as if made of shadows. Her face twisted into a grotesque smile, her eyes wide with malice. "No!" Thomas gasped, stepping back in terror. The trees around him groaned and cracked. The ground beneath his feet trembled. The very forest seemed to come alive, closing in on him. The shadows stretched toward him, twisting like claws, pulling him deeper into the darkness. Thomas turned to run, but the forest was no longer a forest. It was a labyrinth of darkness, the trees now looming like twisted figures. His legs were heavy, his breath shallow as the shadows followed, whispering his name. "Thomas! Thomas!" His heart raced as he sprinted, but the whispers grew louder. He stumbled, and the shadows enveloped him, their cold fingers gripping his limbs. He tried to scream, but no sound escaped his throat. The last thing he saw was the woman's face, her twisted grin now filling the entire space around him. "You're one of us now," she hissed. The next morning, the villagers found no trace of Thomas. The forest was silent. The only thing left behind was a blood-stained piece of his jacket, tangled in the underbrush. They say he became another lost soul, another whisper in the wind. Now, if you walk near Ravenwood on a foggy evening, you might hear something. A voice calling your name, or the faintest whisper on the wind. And if you listen too closely, you may find yourself lost in the shadows, trapped forever. Ravenwood is not just a forest. It is a place where the lost are never truly gone. And it waits for the next soul brave or foolish enough to enter its dark embrace.